Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the International Schools Podcast. I'm your co-host, John. Nice to be here again. I think one thing that if you are in any international context, be it professional, traveling, or just living, the chances are that you are in a situation where maybe the language around you is not your mother tongue, or you yourself are speaking a language where you're not the mother tongue, or you might have multiple mother tongues. You might have a parent from one culture and language and a parent from another. And in the context of international schools and in the work world, this is very common that we're kind of talking in multiple languages. Somehow, for the Anglophones, blessed, English is kind of the lingua franca. Will that last? We don't know. I assume that at some point Mandarin will become more important. But this is something that can be challenging, but also very invigorating, because I think sometimes people are put into situations where they're having conversations and the nuances and idioms and cultural references sometimes can be more challenging. Most people gravitate towards English because that's the most common language. Somehow Hollywood and music, has really had a big influence on the language and the way we interact. But in a school setting too, you have many children and faculty members and school staff that are going to be navigating different languages. And this can be really very exciting. It can be really interesting. It can be really enriching, bringing these different cultural perspectives. But in an academic or in a work sense where you actually have to produce and interact in a professional context or in a learning context, this sometimes can be quite challenging. Not in a negative sense, but it does require some heavy lifting in the learning and understanding. And also when you go back home and you don't speak that language, but you have to learn in it, that can be itself quite difficult. Or you go home and your parents, when they go to school, can't actually communicate and you're interpreting for them, or a third party comes and talks and some schools, what they've done is they've actually produced communication in Korean for the Korean community. I was doing some consultancy in Vietnam and they had a lot of documentation in Vietnam. So different schools are understanding communicating in multiple languages. Of course, with AI and technology now, there are situations where kids come into a school and they pick up the iPad and they can have a translator there, and that can ease. But still, that narrative and that dynamic comes with all kinds of interesting and complex challenges, but also a lot of rich opportunities. And today, we're going to focus on this. And Aylin, who is an English language acquisition specialist and also is the founder and creator of Leaves Approach, which is a wonderful ecosystem. And I really encourage you to go to leavesseal.com and you can find out much more about what she's doing in her mission, but she's really empowering educators and affirming multi-language learners. She brings this perspective with a very global lens, being from Turkey originally. Her work with students is from a wide range of linguistic and cultural backgrounds, and she really believes that you should affirm rather than assimilate. And we're really going to get to talk about this. And she is working with multi-language learners in an international school in Malaysia currently. With her is Anna, who's an advocate for multi-language learners, and too is not a native English speaker, but both of them speak English fluently, and she is originally from Romania. And she has a master's from the University of Exeter and has had over a decade of IB school experience working with English language learners, and she really believes learning is part of everyday learning, not a separate activity. And she really advocates for this idea of extended conversations, team meetings, and classroom decision driven around this lens of multi-language learner and building confidence and being able to access the curriculum. So Aylin and Anna, a very warm welcome to the International Schools Podcast.
Thank you so much, John.
So
just to interrupt, a very warm welcome from us as well, because it is actually very warm here in Malaysia at the moment.
Well, believe it or not, here in Europe, it's also become very warm. We've had the most highest temperatures ever recorded in May. And so
Yes.
I think we're all coming to, maybe a little late, but to some self-realization that climate change is not a hoax. It's a real thing that we're going to have to navigate. But thank you. So, Aylin, for a student learning English, when English is not yet their strongest language, what can an ordinary school day actually feel like socially, academically, and environmentally and emotionally? And I would say that might be even in a professional context, it's not a school. So I'd just like to hear, what are you observing as you work and support schools in this area?
It really depends on where the student is in their journey. If we're talking about a student who is new to an English-speaking English medium school, then an ordinary school day would be very intimidating. Because imagine trying to learn the new school environment, the language itself, the content, and trying to navigate friendship circles all at once. It's pretty overwhelming. So at first, they might be really overwhelmed and intimidated by this. And we see students staying very quiet at this stage, just simply observing. And then if they become more familiar with the international school environment, of course, the social language develops a little bit faster. So they start making friends, they start feeling more safe and secure in international school environments. Yet, when they go into the classroom, in science classroom, for example, that anxiety kicks in again. Because the language that they use with their friends outside the classroom is different than the language they are expected to use in the classroom, in content classrooms. So it really depends on the time. But I can say that especially academically, they have this cognitive load all the time, multilingual learners. And because of that cognitive load and fear of making mistakes, they have emotionally anxiety pretty much the whole time, I would claim. And that anxiety, level of anxiety, is one of the biggest barriers when it comes to second language acquisition. There are some theories around that. If you would like, we can get into the theories as well in second language acquisition field. But knowing from myself, when as a language learner, when you feel anxious, scared of making mistakes, what do? You stay quiet. You don't have or you don't create those opportunities for yourself to practice the language, which is the essential tool. Practice itself is the best tool to learn a new language, right? So that's the missing bit if they're not doing that. Unfortunately, I can say most of the time, depending on the proficiency level as well, of course, but if they don't yet have the academic language, especially international school environments for multilingual learners, are pretty exhausting, I can say.
I can imagine, and I think your point's really interesting because they have that social context where maybe it's easier out on the field during a break time or even around the coffee machine in a professional context. And then this idea that, as they're observing, they kind of, in observation, they have to kind of quieten down and just take it all in. And I think that tension that you talk about between the content language and the academic language and the social language is really interesting. Anna, when a multilingual learner is quiet, hesitant, and not joining in, what might be happening beneath the surface that maybe teachers, peers, and parents may not see?
So when I think about multilingual learners being quiet, I think about Dr. Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa's research about the multilingual brain. She talks about living languages. Are the languages being lived by the people, or are the languages themselves alive? And I think multilingual learners live between two worlds or more, two or more worlds, two languages, and they have to navigate multiple living languages, linguistic and cultural worlds, where they have to go through this intense cognitive, linguistic, and emotional work. Just like Aylin was saying, this cognitive load doesn't just start with the lesson. It really starts from the moment when they enter the building. So beneath the surface, the learner may be quiet, but they may be the learner may be quiet, but beneath the surface, the learner may be listening carefully. They may be translating, matching meaning with pre-background knowledge, retrieving knowledge, processing meaning, searching for the right word, monitoring grammar, pronunciation, accent. And lastly, but I think one of the most important thing is they are doing a risk assessment at the same time. Is it safe to speak? Speaking, expressing oneself in a new language requires so much courage, and particularly when mistakes can feel so public, right? When we take that step, and we've processed, we've thought about the content, and we have the answer. Now I have to take that step of speaking up. And some learners choose to observe before participating, using this time to learn the language, the culture, and the unwritten rules of the social interaction. Because for us, for example, living and working with students from Asian cultures, listening actively, waiting to be called upon can be a sign of respect for the teacher and the learning process, right? But for Western cultures, these cultures place a higher value on verbal participations, questioning, discussion, and public expression, right? So this can be very uncomfortable for multilingual learners. They may be quiet because they don't understand the nuances of the questions. Now they kind of got the idea, okay, I have to speak. But then a teacher uses rhetorical questions. So now they're like, oh, do I say something or do I not say something? and then they're posed with questions such as any thoughts or any wonderings. And now the wheels are turning. Okay, wonderings, what's that? Thoughts about the data, thoughts about the author, thoughts about the text. What is going on? So it's extremely daunting, right? And imagine sustaining a second language for 7, 8, and so for some students, even 9 hours per day, right? This is the exhaustion that Aylin was also speaking about. This is not just metaphorically. This is really the reality, a physical reality of our students, right? And imagine leaving your true self. There is some sadness when, especially in the secondary school, where I see students who in their first language, they can articulate, they are funny, they have the knowledge, but they cannot express it. It's almost like leaving your best self outside at the door and stepping into a new world where you have to navigate in a completely new language that you haven't mastered. This is truly, truly hard. And one thing I wanted to say, I would like teachers to ask themselves, instead of why this child quiet? Why does this child not participating? I think teachers should ask, what invisible work is this student doing right now? Because we might not see it, but the work is there.
I think this is a great point that you bring up, is this invisible work, because at the beginning, as you're describing this idea of risk assessment and deciding, how much do I engage in trying to translate and make those connections with their culture and language. And then also these words, if you're in an inquiry school, it's reflections, wonderings, or if you do visible thinking, as you described, these things can be quite challenging to kind of decide, do I jump in? And I think your point about culture, having also worked and lived in Asia, this idea of respect and actually not speaking up is a sign of respect and actually the thing that you should do, compared to maybe other cultures where you're very happy just to raise your hand or not even raise your hand and just speak out. So I think this journey that you've described is so important. And I think your point, a really important one, is so often we don't look at the invisible, and maybe, as you say, the invisible is where a lot of things are happening. I'm just wondering, Aylin, because both of you are non-native speakers, and it's amazing. Are these things that Anna has experienced or has observed, are these things that you yourself go through, even though now you're teaching it?
John, thank you so much for asking the question. Otherwise, I was going to jump in to add. I do. After all these years of learning English, I started learning English back in Turkey at the age of 12. And I chose to continue my education all in English, obviously taught by Turkish teachers. So Turkish educational system. Going to university, teaching English, doing my master's degree in England, spending time living in England, being married to an Englishman. I am still struggling some days cognitively, every single day. And this is something I say to my students all the time. There will not be a point where you feel like I know English fully. There will always be a word that you haven't seen before. There will always be an expression, idiom, that you have never heard before, because there are lots of English-speaking cultures, even they don't understand the idioms they're using. American culture, British culture, they've got different ways of saying or different ways of using words. For example, I clearly remember when I was teaching back in China, I was chatting with an American teacher, and with my students, this is going to sound funny, but hang in there, I'll explain. With my students, they were collecting diapers to take to an orphanage. And I say diapers, so it's understood now. But I called it nappies. And this American teacher came to me, didn't want to make it obvious to the students. What's a nappy? Do you see where I'm going? There is always something new that we are learning as second language speakers of English. And I also want to add my husband's experience. When we first lived in Turkey together, he didn't speak Turkish. He was learning Turkish. He's a funny guy. He talks a lot. He loves socializing. Something that he said to me when we moved to Turkey actually hit me. And I always use this example in language teaching as well, especially when we talk about identity affirming practices. He said to me, I am not myself, Aylin. Nobody understands who I am, who I actually am. I'm a funny guy. I love making jokes, but I can't do any of those in Turkish. So it's kind of like losing a limb, actually, a side of you that is so important, but you can't quite express yourself. And I completely agree with Anna. Our students go through this all the time. When they're silent, yes, there's the processing happening, cognitive processing happening for sure. But yeah, it is a very important point.
Anna.
And it's interesting what you're saying, because I know that my culture, we are very direct. We say it how it is, kindly, politely, of course, and always we mean very, very well. So in my work with teachers of multilingual learners, so I had to collaborate to co-teach with teachers in science, in math, in humanities. So I always go to the table with strategies, very enthusiastic, and I just go boom, 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 boom. My list and what we need to do to support our kids. And then teachers were like, wait a minute, Anna, you're going in far too strong. I'm not sure I'm on board with all this. And I thought to myself, what am I doing wrong? I'm actually presenting information, offering strategies, offering support, but it's not well received. So I had to pause and I had to think, like, okay, it's most likely the way I'm saying things, because coming from my background, my culture, it is okay to be direct, and it's okay to tell people how we can improve things. But in many other cultures, like in Western cultures, that is, we need to soften a little bit that blow, in my experience at least. So it was very interesting how not only learning English, but also learning how to express yourself without words, or to take in that in consideration the way you will be received and how you perceived, maybe better said. That's also such a very important aspect of learning a language. Oftentimes in class, I have my Chinese speakers speak so loudly to each other, and I had to ask, are you fighting? Argument? There's no argument here. We are just having a friendly conversation. But from the outside, you would see that they are ready to put on the gloves. So that was interesting as well.
I like that anecdote because we lived in Japan for many years, and then we went on a bike trip. We wanted to cycle around Taiwan, and I remember when we were on the train to take us and our bikes to the coast to start the bike trip, we were really kind of surprised because everything was super loud and people were animated. And really, I mean, as you say, when they were talking, it felt more like a conflict than a constructive conversation. So that really resonates. One of the things that, you both are in yourselves multilingual learners, and you are in couples of different cultures. I'm wondering for kids, Anna, what have you, if you think of your own experience with your husband and you that come from different cultures, and then maybe when you go to your home countries, each of you might not speak that language. I'm thinking about children that come into a school and they have to learn English. Their parent speaks one language, their father speaks another, and then they have this third language, which is the bridge language. How do kids navigate that? What are you noticing when they're trying to juggle this dynamic of basically potentially 4 different languages to survive?
The stronger their first language, the faster they will learn the second, the third, and even the fourth. So it really depends. If the students who have a very strong literacy background in their first language, those are the students who will be the most successful in learning English and in participating in subjects in an international school. I oftentimes say to students that you have the social language and you have the academic language. If you have the academic language in your first language as well, then you can transfer that knowledge to English, and they catch that much faster. I tell parents not to lose their first language. I tell parents to continuously encourage them speaking Chinese and Japanese and Korean and Hungarian, because those strong foundations are going to be what will maintain the other languages.
Aylin,
sorry.
What about the situation where, because thank you, Anna, for that clarity about, having that strong roots in your mother tongue or in a language, both academically and socially. Do you see kids never have that because their parents move around a lot and they're going to English schools, and then maybe suddenly they go to a country and they have to switch to another language, or even the parents themselves don't have that grounded language because they're from a multilingual? I'm just wondering, because Anna's examples are really concrete. It makes really sense. And of course, it's, research backed, but I'm wondering about the kid that never has that grounded and floats. How do you support those kids and parents themselves?
John, I do have students who say that, Korean students, Japanese, Chinese, who say that they're really bad at Korean. They're really bad at Chinese. For years, they haven't formally studied their languages. So what Anna was mentioning earlier, and I completely agree with that, the stronger your first language is, the faster and better you will learn another language. They struggle in the sense that when they go to Chinese class, for example, as their identity language, they can't keep up with the academic demands of it. But the trick is, these are all cognitive skills. As Anna mentioned earlier, if kids develop the cognitive skills in one language, then they're transferable. That's why it makes the other language easier to learn. They've got something to compare. Oh, I can do this in Chinese, which means I can do this in English as well. They sometimes have maybe, should I say that, identity crisis. They don't quite know, third culture kids especially, they don't know where they quite belong. When we talk about roots and identity in our classes, for example, some of my students can't really talk about their countries and the fact that they can't speak the language really well. So when they go back to their home country to visit grandparents, for example, they struggle to communicate with them. I think the responsibility falls onto parents, families as well here. They really need to be aware of the fact that providing the identity language, mother tongue, home language, whatever you call it, for students in the household is so important.
Tell me, oh, go ahead, Anna. Sorry, go ahead.
And reading in their first language.
Yes.
You know, I must say that in Western cultures, parents read to their children. So I have, in my experience, when I have students from Western cultures who are also learning English, their English develops somehow much faster. Yes. Of course, the proximity between the languages helps as well, but it's the children are being read to even when they're older. It is not very common in this side of the world, in Asian cultures, right? They are
too.
Because they're going to school. The teacher is meant to read to them. The teacher is meant to teach them. So it's so important. And I always tell the children, read at home, read aloud at home. That will help your pronunciation, your grammar, your vocabulary, your comprehension, but also read to your parents. Read in your mother tongue or read in English. Just read. That is going to be extremely helpful.
Yeah, and I think, there's so much research around this importance of being read to, so you become a much better reader for deep thinking, critical thinking, and perspectives and emotional, understandings of different contexts. Aylin, you talk, and both of you have been talking about this idea of the identity language. And what I want to understand is, explain that identity and what happens when you don't have an identity language.
Identity language refers to the language students most feel connected to. For example, my children have never lived in England, but they're lucky enough to spend most of their day at school, at home, through English language. So English language is both their mother tongue and also identity language, the language they identify with. But in other scenarios, you would see children who, for example, parents are from Western cultures, but they were born in China, Germany, or any other country. And because of the schooling and daily life, depending on the context, of course, they might not be going to international schools. They might just be going to public schools, and they pick up the language of that country. So they identify with that language because they're the strongest in it. So mother tongue and home languages, these are all titles, of course, but identity language-wise, I believe not only identity language-wise, but one or two or three languages that the kids feel strong in is very important. Children should not be denied, because it's their right to have that sort of connection with a language, with a culture, with their roots in general. So it is very important to have that identity language, or whatever you call it, and also develop new language skills in another language.
Yeah, and I think that's so important. Your example of your children having this identity language, even though they've never lived in the United Kingdom, they still associate with it because that's, the language that you're working at home. I'm wondering, Anna, do we do a disservice? And I'm just wondering for you yourself, being a second language learner, do you find that you sometimes hesitate sharing that you're speaking Romanian, or do you have opportunities? I'm just wondering, as an adult, because both of you are actually talking about, in some ways, the kids that you teach, the kids that you support, the colleagues that you're working with, collaborating with, but you yourself are living it day to day. And I'm just wondering, for you, Anna, how do you navigate? Because you have Spanish, you have English, and you have Romanian. So in your head, what language is the one that you work with?
Wow. Okay. So that's a very good question. My mother is Hungarian and my father is Romanian. So I grew up in a Hungarian-Romanian household. And Hungarian is the language that I used with my grandparents. I loved my grandparents very, very much. And whenever I speak it, I don't speak it as often anymore, but I always have this warm feeling. It's the language of my grandparents and my mother as well. But Romanian is my identity language. I love being Romanian. I love our history. I love who we are as people, as my culture, and I'm very, very proud of it. And I'm grateful that we live in a time where I do not have to feel ashamed of where I am, where I come from, and who I am. I'm very proud to share that I'm Romanian. I'm very proud to share that I also speak Spanish with my husband, being from Guatemala. I'm grateful for also speaking German. I lived in Germany for several years and I've had the opportunity to learn German. And then English is the language of opportunities for me. English opened doors for me to see the world. And I will be forever grateful. I really, really enjoy teaching in English. I enjoy teaching the subject English. But at my core, I know that I am truly a multilingual learner with strong Romanian roots. And I think because of my experience, I can have these conversations with my students and I can encourage and empower them to feel proud of who they are. Because oftentimes they come and they say, "Oh, Miss Anna, I have that word, it's here. You know what?" And they tell me, "Miss Anna, it's loading, like on old computer, it's loading, but it's not coming yet." And I said, it's okay. Just write it in your language. Start the sentence in English. You get stuck, write it in your language. Continue in English. You get stuck, write it in your language, and then we'll figure it out later, right? But it's just seeing the kids learning English. They know that it's the language that is going to open doors, just like it has opened doors for me. It is the language that will get them into the university of their choice, into the career of their choice. But that doesn't mean that they have to lose or forget who they are. And oftentimes we have conversations. I have a lovely Russian student in my class. I also teach INS grade 9 this year, and it's been a blast with the students. And just because of our history, Russia and Romania, we were under the USSR, so we have these conversations. And she's so proud to have a teacher who understands her history, and it's just beautiful. I guess to conclude, I'm very proud of who I am. I am not ashamed. And I'm also very grateful to have worked with amazing colleagues who have encouraged me, empowered me, and in true international schools where being multilingual or multicultural was an asset and not necessarily something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, and I think your point about being able to be proud of who you are and have that language and allow it to be alive, even though you might have to navigate in English, as you say, the kind of for the opportunities, professional, that I think that's so important, because I know for many people, especially many years ago, when they left their country and went to another country, often they wouldn't speak the language because they wanted to assimilate, and there was kind of a negative connotation. I'm wondering, Aylin, How do you try to really promote that? Because you understand that, Anna, and you understand that, and you can interact with the kids. But how does that one translate that in a school context? So it's just not two wonderful teachers that are promoting that, but it becomes more of a system, a systematic process where there is a commonality of understanding the richness that Anna just described with her different languages.
I think it all starts with awareness, first of all, John. If teachers are aware of all these cognitive loads and anxiety that students are going through, then empathy kicks in, of course, and they will show more understanding towards their needs, demands, not seeing their language proficiency level as a deficit, or a cognitive problem, but actually understand how second language acquisition works and what they can do to support their multilingual learners in the classroom. Raising awareness is one of the ways, of course. Systemic changes are harder to achieve, for sure. It takes a while, of course, to shift from a system to another. But slowly, I think with that consciousness, we go through our students, because as long as our students are aware of their own needs, they can advocate for themselves. And that's actually, even when we are discussing whether a student can exit the support systems, EAL, ESOL, whatever we call it, we talk about this. Can they actually advocate for themselves? Have they come to that point? Because it is so important. We can't expect every teacher to change their pedagogy. Well, we can actually, but we're aware that it would be a difficult mission. But if the students know their own linguistic needs and social needs in the classroom as well, then they can advocate for themselves. Personally, this is what I'm trying to do with my students most of the time. First of all, empowering them to use their voices, to be who they are. And as Anna was saying, we do have some students who are kind of ashamed of showing their identity, their language. Just saying to my students, you're perfect. You've got no problems. You're just learning English and you know another language. The fact that you're learning English means that you've got another language that you're so good at. So know that, know yourself, and advocate for your needs in the classroom if they're not being delivered by the teacher themselves.
I love this idea of kids advocating for themselves and really creating an environment where that is kind of highlighted and promoted and where you really encourage, because I think that idea to be self-aware and that metacognitive process of being able to understand, I've reached a certain fluency or a certain understanding that I'm going to now say, yes, I'm ready to move on. I'm going to ask you a question because I have been in many international schools, and usually what parents, not everybody, but sometimes the issue is parents want their kids to be surrounded by English speakers. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and usually these are not Anglophone parents, but they're parents from other cultures, because they see English as you said, Anna, the language of opportunity for university, for professional. It's the language that many people in the business world and outside of education use. It's a common language that kind of transcends borders. How often and what is kind of the perspective? Because I'm sure international schools are gravitating that tension where they have this demand to have, English be the dominant language, and then suddenly you have English as a second language teacher, or whatever the label is. They change so often, I hesitate to even put one. But what kind of reactions have you gotten when suddenly the parents like, well, you're not a native English speaker. Why are you teaching my kid English? So I would just love to hear, Anna and Aylin, both maybe your anecdotes. And is this shifting, and is there research that maybe backs it? I know these are a lot of questions, but I want to take this opportunity because I think it's something that so often comes up and is kind of this invisible conversation that occurs. Anna?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. I think, Aylin, would you like to start with this one? I need time to process this.
I can. I actually firsthand had an experience about this. Without giving any names or context, in a recruitment process, the school principal, I was head of department, we were looking at different, candidates, and the school principal said to me, we need to get a native speaker, because you're non-native, so we now have to have a native speaker. Thinking about the image of the school. Unfortunately, this idea is still there. And I know for well through experience that there are judgments towards it as well. I have never heard this from parents, by the way. Parents were always so appreciative because all I was doing is sharing my experiences, my personal experiences with the students. And I think they really value that, both students and parents. In schools, I have sadly come across with certain situations where people couldn't quite believe what I was doing. How can you do that? You're not even a native speaker, or because I was Turkish, etc., which is a completely different topic that we can talk on for days. But these things, sadly, John, still happen. Of course, it's changing. Of course, there is research to support that non-native teachers have better understanding about the language, talking about mechanics of language especially. Yeah. Native speakers sometimes lack that side of the knowledge about the language. However, because we're learning it as a second language, and depending on the system, education system you're learning English in my context, Turkish educational context, it was always very didactic, very prescribed. They were just teaching us the rules, sentences, gap-filling exercises, memorize the vocabulary lists sort of approach, traditional approaches. If you're learning it like that, of course, you know about the language so well, which is definitely a positive. I think people started to see that about non-native teachers, but also we have an understanding of language as identity, as part of identity as well. As Anna was talking about her identity earlier, these are so important, whichever language is your second language, not because we're talking about English as a second language here. It could be any other language, but it's so important because language is so closely connected to identity. They're intertwined, actually.
Yeah, and I think that point is so important that you keep bringing it up, this connection with identity. And thank you for sharing that, because I think we need to be honest sometimes, even in 2026, there's still perspectives and opinions, and if you, as you said, coming from Turkey, there's obviously people make assumptions which often are completely wrong, but those assumptions are there and those perceptions are there. So really, thank you for sharing that. Anna, I would love to hear your own thoughts, and I put you on the spot, so hopefully now you.
No, and I guess I've had a conversation with another colleague who is actually from Mexico, and she was sharing the same thing that you were sharing. It's quite hard. She was sharing that it's becoming a bit harder to get a job in an international school, even though she works in early childhood. And one of the possibilities she was thinking that she couldn't get the position because of her language. And I was quite shocked because I don't know, often talk to Aylin about this, and it's either I've been extremely blessed to have had really, really great opportunities and really good, in good international schools, or because I've never encountered this. And I think parents, like Aylin said, they are quite grateful. Oftentimes they tell me that they understand my language better than they would understand the principal's language. So it's almost, oftentimes they would ask me to be in meetings with the principal or with the coordinators, just to be almost translating English to English, but just a tad more comprehensible for them. The way I speak is more, they understand better. And I think because of my job is both supporting English language learners, but also supporting teachers and supporting the students in the content areas. And oftentimes students come to me and they ask questions about science, about math, about humanities that I might not have the knowledge, but I'm able to work the language so I make it understandable, accessible for them, and they appreciate that. So I have in my career, my almost 15 years careers working with multilingual learners, I've not received yet that pushback or that barrier due to my nationality or not being a native English speaker. Of course, occasionally there are teachers who come from English, who are English speakers. They would tell me, you have an accent. Where are you from? Russia? I'm like, no, Romania. Oh, it's kind of in the area. No, but close. So, so yeah, that's always going to be there, and it's okay. I do have an accent, and I am proud of the accent that I have. It's a sign of courage, as we were talking about courage earlier. It's a sign that I do speak more than one language, and I am able to live in more than one worlds, like Dr. Takuhama was saying. So, yes, it's I think with the more knowledge parents have, the more that mindset shifts, and it's on to us, not us as teachers, but also as the leadership in the school, to be able to show that we value them as multilingual learners, and for that reason we value multilingual teachers. We want multilingual teachers. We want children to see themselves in the teachers, in the faculty and staff. And I think this will continue, and hopefully there's going to be more change in the world of international teaching.
Definitely positive.
Yeah, and I think your point's really important, is that often, and this is often brought up, and we've had guests on here who've said, sometimes kids don't actually see their own race or culture represented in the faculty that's around them. So their points of reference tend to be certain culture or certain geographic area. And I think that's really important, is also for a parent to understand that, here's a professional that is successful, that is from different culture, but speaks English and is navigating that. I think that's very empowering. The fact is, I think international schools in any organization is a learning organization, and you learn from what you see and you try to improve. We're coming close to the end of the podcast, and I'm just wondering, for each one of you, as people are listening to this, we talked about the impact that both of you have in the classroom with your students. But then there's also the impact, as we talked, Aylin, about kind of the system changes and kind of making it grounded in the kind of day-to-day functioning. So if both of you are not there in the school, this philosophy and this approach continues. What would each one of you would invite schools to consider as they grapple or even consider, and maybe they are already amplifying this approach? What would be one thing you want people just to reflect upon I think that's so important, especially with what you've been sharing about identity and the cognition and working in multiple languages, and also the silence that occurs and the cognition that takes place and the importance of reading. We covered so many different aspects. I would love for you just to kind of, as we wrap up, just share what are you would want to invite our audience to think about as they walk away from this podcast. Aylin, you want to start?
Sure. I would talk about this deficit lens again. Changing this deficit lens is the most important thing. And schools are doing this actually. Recently, there have been lots of changes around this idea of multilingualism, translanguaging, and all this. So schools are actually trying to put that into practice as well. But unfortunately, if you look at the overall picture, the systems are still showing some sort of assumption that limited language proficiency, English proficiency, reflects limited ability.
Okay.
I would say that belief changing actually shifts everything. But it also starts with this understanding of how cognitive skills are different than language skills, like we were saying earlier. These students have these cognitive skills. All they need to do now is to develop the language in order to be able to express themselves. So I will go ahead and say leaders have the biggest responsibility. International school leaders have the biggest responsibility here, because individual teacher enthusiasm about this topic, trying to integrate different strategies in the classroom. Of course, these are good practices. However, if we want to talk about a school system, ecosystem that is actually inclusive, affirming, validating, then we need to start with the leaders. Because if the leaders buy in, then the teachers will buy in, and students will feel affirmed, and they will feel like they belong. They will feel safe to be themselves in the school environment. And that ecosystem is so important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that's so important, is that, you know, as you said, the individual teacher can only do so much, and it has to be a kind of a systematic, kind of global strategic approach. And also, you know, as a leader, you know, you have to walk the talk, right? If you believe in multilingualism, then you have to be very upfront about how you're engaging with it as an individual. Anna.
And just to continue from what Aylin was saying, I think because, yes, we see a rise in international students who's multilingual learners, who do not speak English as their first language. And I think to some degree, leaders get scared and like, wow, we have so many English language learners. Our teachers are not yet well equipped to support all these students. So we are going to start bringing in English language development programs, which are good. They are great. During those English language development classes, students are learning English. However, multilingual learners should not be the sole responsibility of only the English language specialists, because then that learning becomes isolated. We've talked about social language and academic language. It is absolutely impossible to learn the language of science, the language of math, the language of humanities, the language of design in a self-contained English development class. So I think instead of that, we should put our resources in equipping teachers, in professional development, in supporting the students' language development where they spend the most amount of time, which is in the subject classrooms, not in the standalone English language development class. So if I could, that's something that I would like to change, or to bring back, or to strengthen, because That's in the mainstream. That's where the magic happens, not in self-contained, isolated silos.
Absolutely. And thank you for bringing that up. I think that's a really important point. I have a question that always the kids that I teach, because I'm in a bilingual school, so I teach in French and English during the day. They always ask me what language I dream in. So, Aylin, what language do you dream in?
I was reading an article about this today, as if you knew. So I think and dream in English, strangely.
Okay.
But in the past, I remember dreaming in Arabic as well. So how reliable is that information? I don't know.
Okay,
I don't
that's great.
speak Arabic,
Yeah.
but I dreamed in Arabic.
Okay, that's great. What about you, Anna? Do you dream in Romanian?
I would say I dream in English as well. Sometimes in Spanish, sometimes in English. I think Spanish and English are, for me at this moment, the languages I speak the most. However, just a few weeks ago, I was talking with my students, and would like to share this, and we were talking about their names. Chinese, Korean names have so much symbolism and so much meaning. They are beautiful. And the Chinese students gave me a Chinese name based on things I like. And yes, I found myself dreaming about me speaking Chinese. They also taught me how to say life is hard in Chinese, because I always tell them, guys, life is hard, but they are secondary school students, right? Not elementary kids. And they, but I try to encourage them, they will make it. So I know hun, nan, I forgot now. But they, it really depends. But I don't think multilingual learners just think in or dream in one language. I think it really depends on the context. It really depends on the event. It really depends on how they feel as well. And that's why they probably dream also in several languages, like me and Aylin.
And John, may I add, it actually creates this idea of thinking in another language. And I suppose if your brain is doing that cognitively, dreams might be affected by that as well. But you get so used to using the second language, in my case, English, that there is this reverse effect. It affects your native language. So when I speak Turkish sometimes, I translate from English. So I use these phrases, structures that we don't normally use on a daily basis in Turkish. And my friends and family will tell me, we don't say it like that in Turkish. But in my head, it makes total sense.
Yeah. Wow, thank you. Well, I want to thank both of you, because I think it's so important as we are surrounded. Multilingualism is important, and there are hundreds and hundreds of languages, and their accents and their regional accents and dialects. And I think we really need to celebrate this. And I so appreciate you coming with this lens, both you being multilingual learners and living in a bicultural environment, and then working, both of you are currently working in Malaysia. So another layer of culture and identity. But I want to thank both of you. I just want to remind our audience again that Aylin has her leaveseal.com. Do go over there and check it out. There's some wonderful things. And both Aylin and Anna have their LinkedIn. And I know if you're interested, do reach out to them. If you've got questions or anything you want to follow up with, we have the show notes. And want to thank our audience again. As I say every time, it must feel like a broken record, but we appreciate the comments, the feedback on the LinkedIn group. And of course, feel free to reach out if you have questions, both to Aylin and Anna. Both of you, thank you so much for your time and insights and wisdom. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much, John. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.